Hello, everyone. I'm Officer Cervantes. Welcome to today's media availability. Today is November 23rd, 2021. Thank you for joining us. Just a friendly reminder to raise your hand if you have a question. The Chief, you may begin.
Hello, everyone. So today, during my commission remarks, I covered our COVID update as I do each week, but also spoke about the establishment of a robbery homicide division, follow home robbery task force, and then also our preparation for the upcoming Hollywood parade along Hollywood Boulevard coming this Sunday night, and then also a recent smash and grab this morning, or actually late last night at Nordstrom's at the Grove, and our concerns relative to what's happening in Beverly Hills, and as we've seen happen in San Francisco, Chicago, to New York to a lesser extent. So those remarks are all, I'm sure most of you have. Rather than going back over that, I'd rather take questions and answers on that, and then cover any other issues you might ask about.
Thank you, Chief. We can begin with Stephanie. Go ahead and ask your question.
Well, mine was about the Nordstrom event yesterday, and because I wasn't able to cover the LAPC thing today.
Well, I'll give you a brief synopsis regarding the Nordstrom's smash and grab that occurred at the Grove last night. Let me get my notes here. We ultimately made 3 arrests, and it involved 18 to 20 individuals, we believe, armed with a sledgehammer and likely an e-bike, one of those battery-operated bicycles. They used those items to smash a glass pane window and then enter the store, where they grabbed merchandise and then fled. There's about $15,000 worth of damage, we understand, to the business itself, and then at least $5,000 worth of merchandise. This morning was still being evaluated. The individuals, as they fled, there were officers nearby that attention was drawn to this, and they identified the vehicles, and they attempted to stop one of the vehicles. Then a vehicle pursuit ensued. It terminated in South Los Angeles. Suspects, individuals inside, fled on foot. A perimeter was established, and 3 individuals were arrested, one a juvenile. Inside the vehicle was merchandise that was recovered from the looting that occurred, or the burglary that occurred at the Nordstroms, as well as one of the individuals, the juvenile, was wearing clothing that was depicted on camera feeds or recordings that were taken from inside the Nordstrom's business itself. What wasn't addressed this morning was that we also now have information that's led us to believe that there was a CVS burglary that occurred in South Los Angeles shortly before the burglary that occurred at the Nordstroms. At that CVS burglary, that store lost about $300 worth of merchandise, and again, merchandise from that burglary was recovered during this investigation from the suspect's vehicle. This is the first incident that the department has had relative to what we've seen in other parts of the country that began, I believe, largely in the aftermath of the Rittenhouse verdict. We did have over the weekend some demonstrations, peaceful, lawful, that I discussed in my remarks this morning. But in one of those that occurred in the Mid-Wilshire district along Pan Pacific Park, there was a group of people there that then walked or moved over to a Citibank, where they smashed windows, threw tomato sauce and spray painted some interior items and created damage. And the vandalism that occurred there, we believe, is directly related to the Rittenhouse verdict in that trial. Those individuals were different than the 3 individuals that we captured today, in that those individuals we've had prior contact with at other demonstrations, other marches, and other protests, and they've actually been arrested for those. This morning's 3 individuals all have prior criminal histories of varying degrees and varying offenses, including firearms. So we don't attribute the Citibank attack as to it being related. We see instead last night's event mirroring more what occurred the day before at a high-end retailer in Beverly Hills, as well as what we saw over the weekend at high-end retailers in San Francisco and Chicago, and to, again, a lesser extent, New York. What we're doing about this is, in preparation for our holiday shopping season, is we in advance. I've already reached out to merchants and retailers to ensure that they have good plans in place to handle the increased traffic loads and to have a festive season, but also a safe one, a secure one. Historically, we've added footbeats and patrols, increased our visibility around these centers to ensure the safety of everyone involved. In the aftermath of this burglary, the smash and grab last night, as well as reflecting upon the fact that it occurred just the evening before at Beverly Hills, and the fact that we're seeing this occur in other parts of the country, I've directed added resources to be assigned in parts of the city that have these high-end merchant retailers, and that you'll see those beginning tonight and at least through the weekend. And the presence there is to reassure the merchant population that up and down the state are expressing a great deal of uncertainty and concern for their very livelihoods because of these attacks and the damage it does, not just in the loss of merchandise, but the fear and the intimidation it has upon the public that is visiting these centers for their safety, the safety of their children, their spouses, and so forth. So as a department, we're going to take and act aggressively in ensuring that we have visibility that's readily seen. We'll also act swiftly in the apprehension and prosecution of those that feel that this is an opportunity for them. And we're also continuing to monitor open source social media feeds such as Instagram and Twitter and other such that broadcast information about these individuals that as they move about the city or they go about their actions, that we would be aware of it and use those those information flows to assist us in thwarting their efforts to cause this havoc in our communities.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. Our next question will be from Phil. Go ahead with your question, Phil.
Chief, I talked to Rick Caruso this morning, who said that he thinks that city leaders have not done enough to give your department the resources you need. He mentioned 800 officers that you're down. I'm not sure if that's an accurate number, but is that part of the equation here?
Well, the cutbacks or the reduction in workforce that we've experienced over the last year and a half, stemming from the COVID crisis, the economic crisis that this city has had, along with the rest of the country, has reduced our flexibility. It has impacted our ability to have added staffing in some areas. The year that we're currently in, we have seen some restoration. We do have we have compensation for our overtime, and it's paying as we're going instead of comp time last year. But our resources are down hundreds of officers, and this is not a matter for me to point to fault. This is a matter for me to point to, with the resources we have, this is the direction we're going in. I'm also calling upon us that as we do our very best, that we have to increase our presence, and we are using, for instance, this weekend, that we'll be using overtime hours and dollars that will allow us to bolster our staffing, that there may be a need for further bolstering of that. And we've had conversations with our elected officials about that. It really depends on where this pattern goes and where our shooting violence and the increase in homicides and aggravated assaults that we've seen over this last 18 months, if we can stem that tide. A smaller workforce limits us as far as what available number of personnel we can put on the street and put in uniform and at these locations and others. But I don't deal with what I wish I had. I deal with what I have, and what we have is a workforce that is eager to be out and patrol, to be seen, to be a deterrent, and to take action with those that are attempting to prey on merchants or prey upon others.
Thank you, Chief. Our next question will be from Mr. Steve Gregory. Go ahead with your question, Steve.
Good afternoon, Chief. I wanted to ask if you're learning a lot about how these robbers are handling their business. I mean, it looks like this is a lot of copycat stuff going on. They're copying what happened in the Bay Area. Are you afraid this is going to cause a lot of copycat crime similar around the city? And what are you learning from that to help sort of ward that off? So
you're correct. We're talking currently with other police chiefs around this region as well as across the country. I just had a text stream between Superintendent Brown and Demont Shea, the commissioner for New York. So we're constantly comparing notes as to what we're seeing in regards to all types of crime, instances of civil unrest, how the community sentiment is dealing with the aftermath of the Rittenhouse trial, the Arbery trial that went to the jury today. We are in communication, understand trends and patterns, and to build off each other's knowledge. What we're seeing with smash and grabs is there's an element of organized theft, we believe, and we also think there's an element of opportunists and copycats that watching social media, watching news reports, see that these surges of 50, 60, 70 people in San Francisco quickly overwhelm a security staff, or can quickly overwhelm even the law enforcement, where a bulk of them are arrested, but the vast majority are able to escape. And that creates a sense that this is an opportunity for people to seize the moment. What we're stressing here in Los Angeles is that we are going to, as we do in every instance of public safety, pivot, adjust, modify our tactics to deal with the present threat. And in that regard, you will see added police uniform officers in black and whites stationed around these type of retailers going forward. That is a heavy commitment. It's one that from a smaller workforce is difficult, but I also know that we enjoy the support of our elected officials in making that pivot and in shifting resources for this issue. Today, we also announced the establishment of a follow home robbery task force out of robbery homicide, and we're mustering additional detectives and investigative resources from throughout the city to focus on that other more pressing issue, where we've actually seen what we believe this morning is related to this, with this murder in Hollywood outside a restaurant, a practice of individuals that are copycatting a technique of targeting individuals with high value jewelry, high value cars, to follow them off or to confront them as they exit high-end retailers and restaurants for a street robbery, armed with handguns, and this morning resulting in the death of a 23-year-old man as he came to the aid of the woman he was with as she was being accosted by these multiple suspects. So we do see a level of copycat. We see a level of people communicating with social
Hey,
media.
it's Phil Schuman with Fox 11.
We see a number of people.
Phil, hold on a second. Phil, hit mute. Thank you.
We see a number of people that are communicating with social media to talk about where police officers are at, where we're stationed, as an effort to flank us and hit other locations. I mean, these are soft targets. There's hundreds of retailers across a region such as ours, and there's only so many police resources. So this is where we are going to continue to monitor and gather information, collectively work together to counter this emerging threat in an effort to stem it and quell it. These are two patterns that, as a city, we have not seen in a substantial period of time. And they have come back here, and our intention is to not allow or accept them as our new reality.
Chief, also, I spoke to some of the shop owners down in the Fairfax district, and they're getting a little bit of PTSD from what happened to them last summer. They feel like the city, the department let them down with respect to helping them secure their property and their response times. And they say now, with the potential verdict coming up in the Arbery case, and also what's been going on with smash and grabs, they're a little skittish about trusting the department. What can you tell these shop owners to reassure them that you've got their back?
Well, I will tell a shop owner that I understand their concern. Their very livelihood is the property they own, or the space that they rent, and they're trying to engage as a retailer with a public. And I sympathize with them. I identify their fear and their apprehension. And my commitment to them is that I know for absolute certainty that every man and woman in this organization is committed to the safety of Los Angeles, and that will work their darndest to ensure that safety, and that we are not looking at this in some passive manner or accepting it as some inevitable. We also know that public safety demands on a collective effort of us working together, and what that means is that I need shop owners to be mindful of patterns and practices, and to talk with one another about suspicious individuals and bring that to the police attention so we can respond and investigate. We cannot and will not be in all places at one time. But as to last year's efforts in the Fairfax and Mid-Wilshire area, again, I stand by the efforts of our officers to deal with a violent and hostile crowd by the thousands. And not all of them were that way, but a significant number engaged in attacks on officers and attacks on businesses and on arson. And our arrests that we made and the actions that we took to stem further violence, I believe was appropriate. And I also stand by our officers doing what they could do. And so we're all, as we see these threats before us, we're all significantly concerned and fearful of what, if left unchecked, this could mean for us as Angelenos. But that fear and apprehension is not going to put us in paralysis, nor is it going to result in some type of overreaction. We're going to be balanced. We're going to be focused on this. We're going to ensure added patrols, and we're going to do everything we can in our power. And what I ask our shops and merchants to do is to believe in the men and women of this organization as they go out and do a tough job, as they go out and do a difficult one, and as they do so in a challenging environment.
I have a couple other questions. I will defer to my colleagues out of respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Emily. Go ahead, Emily, with your question.
Hey, Chief, I wanted to ask you about the Hollywood Christmas parade in light of what happened in Wisconsin. Can you talk about safety and like route security? Are there going to be cars blocking the streets and whatnot?
Sure. So we each year we enjoy the holiday parade on the Hollywood area, and it's attended by tens of thousands and televised. And the route is secured. It is a closed route. And throughout the years, that security has been a variety of everything from heavy vehicles to tape. This year, we are going back and fortifying the route with heavier vehicles. That I announced this morning that the public may see dump trucks, garbage trucks, every other heavy equipment from the city's inventory, particularly on the main lines of the parade route, to ensure that if there's a copycat or somebody who saw the acts in Wisconsin, the devastation, the senseless violence and the loss of life there, and believes that there's such an opportunity here in Los Angeles to know that not only will we have those added fortifications and hundreds of officers deployed, but we'll have additional techniques and investigate or additional strategies that I'll not talk about here to counter such a threat should a person attempt to breach a secure perimeter or pose a risk or a danger to any participant in this parade, whether it be, again, a participant or a spectator.
Would it be fair to say that you have increased the police presence this year in light of what happened in Wisconsin?
Absolutely. Not only the police presence, but also the fortifying of the route to ensure that a person with a vehicle that would attempt to breach that will be effectively countered.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah, with your question.
Hey, Chief, it's Sarah Donchi with KCBS KCAL. Just a couple quick things, just circling back, and I know some of this is rehashing with the follow home robberies that, we've covered a number of them. I know when I went to Sherman Oaks, for example, we heard a couple things from people when we talked to them out on the street. One of them was that people just seem to have this general concern that for whatever reason, criminals are feeling empowered to do this and feel that the consequences are not, substantial enough. And I'm wondering, and also that because you guys can't be everywhere at once, I think a lot of people that I've talked to reporting in Melrose and elsewhere, even in Sherman Oaks, feel like they're kind of sitting ducks and they feel like they're going to be the next target. And I imagine there's probably little that they can do if somebody runs up to them with a gun and you guys aren't there. Can you kind of speak to both things? Like, why do you feel that these people are feeling empowered to do this and actually shooting, in this case, killing people? And also what you would tell, residents who are really feeling scared and concerned?
Well, first of all, I would say is that we're drawing attention to this not to scare or cause hysteria, but to draw attention to the fact that the loss of life, that the increased levels of gun violence, that are now impacting some of our communities in a manner that we haven't seen in recent years concerns us greatly, and that we're shifting and strategizing to impact that with identifying those responsible and bringing them before the criminal justice system. I'm also calling upon the criminal justice system to weigh fully and with forcefully in the prosecution and to ensure that these individuals are not back out on the street in some short order. I think it's critical that there has to be consequences for serious violent individuals that are preying upon neighborhoods or communities, and that includes those that would burglarize or rush into these stores and commit these robberies. They have a profoundly greater impact on the sense of safety and security than simply the dollar loss of the merchandise. This isn't about the dollar loss. This is about the very way in which shoppers and community members and residents would otherwise feel safe and secure because they're in an area that they have not seen this level of crime before, that now startles them and causes them a great deal of trepidation. What I would say to each of those communities, this is a vast area. This is 465 square miles in the state of Los Angeles, and it's 4 million people. We had the Grove and the store at the Grove that was attacked last night. We recognize that we have Century City, we have Sherman Oaks, we have Topanga, we have shopping centers and downtown and the east side, South Los Angeles, all over this area that could be potential targets. And we're identifying, working with those merchants to ensure that their eyes are up, their ears are up, they're watching, they're working with police, they're mindful that and practicing good security processes, and to know that the Los Angeles Police Department is here, and we're going to do all we can to ensure that the safety of their operations and the safety of the public as we enter in this holiday season is there. Again, we want to keep this in proportion, but I do not want to downplay it or minimize it by start counting and reminding people about crime stats about what crime is up or crime is down and what percentages. These have startled us, and as far as members of the public, they have startled and concerned the retailers, and we want to change that perception to one that they feel supported by the police and assured that we'll do all we can, but also that they're going to work together with us to ensure they have the best practices and that we're going to have a safe and a prosperous holiday season. So again, this is a matter that concerns all of us. We're watching it, we're enacting it, and law enforcement's working with all of its partners to understand it and to identify ways of nipping this in the bud.
Do you have any kind of like theory on why the violence, we're seeing more of these violent crimes than we have in the past several years? The presence, the ready availability of handguns. Simply stated, the number of handguns that are in the streets today is you'd have to go back probably at least a decade or more to find this level. And that when there are these type of that ready access, just today I read a report from an investigation where we were able to readily buy handguns off of the street that were all ghost guns. And while we're conducting those undercover operations, and we'll be prosecuting those individuals with all the full power of the U.S. Attorney and also our district attorney, when we can conduct those operations regularly and find ready access to firearms that you can literally buy on the street like you're buying from a vending stand, that results in people carrying guns, and then you have simple robberies or simple low-level attacks or low-level crimes that get accelerated or escalated because a person pushes back or push and resist, and what normally would be perhaps a push or shove, now a person has a gun in their hand and they're willing to use that gun against the victim. And that's we've talked about this months ago, where the proportion of street robberies months ago were actually down year over year. And by the way, over a 2-year period, we still have fewer robberies today than we had 2 years ago. The proportionality of the numbers of those robberies with guns, where the suspects have a firearm, are up substantially. So are arrests. Our arrests for the number of handguns and firearms are up by 50 or 60%. I have to look at my exact stats. I've got a lot of numbers in my head today. But there's just too many guns and too many hands, and that means that the criminal element, the opportunists, those that are trying to take advantage of others, the increased level of
those guns means that they're more dangerous than perhaps in years past. So changing that, we have to ensure that if you have a gun and you use that gun, that we use enhancements in the criminal prosecution of those individuals, that we are holding those individuals in custody and not allowing them back in the community where they pose additional risks. We're tracking currently where we see people who are arrested with guns are back in the street within hours or days only to commit more gun-related crimes. That is not a circumstance that existed years ago, and that's a circumstance that poses dangers to all of us and the communities that we serve.
Thank you, Chief. Our last question will be from Dakota Smith. Dakota, go ahead with your question.
Hi, good afternoon, Chief. I have a question about the LAPD budget that you're looking for next year. Can you just briefly explain the roughly $300,000 for Olympic staffing? What would that be used for? And is that reimbursable? And if so, by what agency? And then secondly, do you anticipate having to hire or want to hire more officers in advance of the game? So there's a higher number by 2028 to keep the city safe, or for whatever reason they need to be hired.
So, absolutely. So let me handle the planning process for the 2028 Olympics has already begun. Began more than 2 years ago. It's going to be an incremental buildup for the games as far as the planning of not just LAPD, but all of the public service agencies, as well as both locally and in this region, for what will put LAPD and LA City on the world stage in the holding of the 2028 Olympics. That planning of that event in this current budget, we've identified for beginning in January of 23, the appointment of a commander, that's a senior executive, and a small team of individuals as we approach the 2024 Olympics in Paris. That planning team will be looking and will continue the dialogue that's already begun with members of this organization, with Paris, and with Marseille, France, about how they're holding their sites, how they're providing for the protection of the venues, how they're handling the opening and closing ceremonies, and what their strategies and tactics are. And then reflect upon that for here in Los Angeles and how we'll conduct it as we begin planning. We visited, members of a small delegation, not myself, but others visited Japan for the 1 year delayed Olympics that were just held, and to see how they're planning and how their execution of the Olympics. So these are all efforts to learn from other participants, to prepare so that this event, much as it was in 1984, is a shining star of success. And as far as the costs are concerned, there's an agreement that will be going before the City Council shortly that speaks to the contract between the City of Los Angeles and the Olympic Planning Committee. And the committee's work to reimburse the city for the costs of the Olympics. And there's more details of that to be coming out in the coming days. But I anticipate that this will be an engagement that will be, that the department will have the needed resources to meet the demands. Lastly, people have said, well, what is the size of the department needed to successfully police and ensure the safety and security of the Olympics in 2028? I believe over the next decade, the size of this organization needs to restart its efforts to continue to grow to meet the needs of 21st century policing in Los Angeles. That a police department that is well-trained, well-equipped, and well-staffed increases the opportunities at the neighborhood level for officers to know the community and for community to know the officers. This isn't a matter of making enforcement. This is a matter of building relationships and building trust. And when a department is too small or understaffed and constrained, then it impacts its ability to have those type of relationships. We become reactionary. We become much like a fire department, simply responding to alarms, rather than having true and authentic relationships in the communities, business, residential, all the stakeholders. So in preparation for the 2028, I do see a bigger department. I see a necessity for it, but I also see a necessity for a larger department to meet the day-to-day needs of a growing metropolis, of an area that is a cosmopolitan and rich part of our world, but also that has social and a number of other challenges that a police department can help in public safety and can help in improving the lives of everyone who lives, who works, and who enjoys this area as their part of just where they exist, and that they can do so here in a safe and this is and should be the safest city and the safest big city in America.
Okay, just to make sure that I understood your answer though about that 300,000. So are you saying that that might be reimbursable? You don't know yet?
We're currently working on the manner of reimbursement. That'll happen either by the Olympic Committee or federal appropriations and earmarks for the city of Los Angeles and for the delivery of the games as we build up for 2028. So the initial outlay, for the budget for this next year, so that 13 months from now, when we establish that commander's position, whether or not that'll be reimbursed immediately or be reimbursed in a cost recovery from the Olympic Planning Committee or from the state or federal resources has yet to be determined.
Okay, is this the first time the LAPD budget has included money for Olympic staffing in any way?
Yes, it is. We have previously, currently, we've had the personnel that are assigned to this at a command and a lower rank are working as an auxiliary function. Their work is split between their typical day job, if you will, and obligations, responsibilities, and then working on the earliest stages of our planning efforts for 2028.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chief, any final thoughts before we end?
Steve Gregory, if you had anything you wanted to add or question?
Yes, sir. Thank you for swinging back around. Two things. You were talking about the kind of the surplus of guns on the streets now, kind of talking about that being a contributing factor to our rise in crime. I would ask you your opinion on whether or not Prop 47 has had any impact on this sort of brazen act of crime, and also the district attorney's new policies with respect on what to prosecute, what not to prosecute. And then also, are you worried at all about private business owners that are starting to arm themselves? And the sheriff has said that he is not only reviewing a record number of CCWs, but he's also granting a record number of CCWs.
So let me address the final part, the last question. I am concerned about shop owners that would see as a solution them arming themselves. A firearm and the use of a firearm against another human being has got to be one of the most, there is no more serious of an issue. Taking of a life is over a defense of a store or defense of merchandise or property is something you can never pull back. You can't change. I don't think the answer here is for shop owners to arm themselves. I think that only increases the level of violence. It only increases the level of loss of life. The shop owner themselves are in peril for themselves, or the weapon being used against themselves, or the gunman now resorting to the use of firearms, and as they're going about their robbery or whatever their attack is in the business. So arming yourself is, in my view, to defend a business is not the appropriate strategy. Secondly, as to the efforts of Prop 47 and criminal justice reforms of the last 10 years. It's not just Prop 47, it's Prop 57, AB 109, all well-intended. But I think there's room for cleanup, particularly for habitual offenders, particularly for individuals who have demonstrated a path where they will not rehabilitate. And whether that's the fault of the incarceration and the prison system that's unable or ineffective in changing them into a type of readiness into recovery and act responsibly in a societal setting or not. The reality of the matter is individuals who've committed violent crimes, who are habitual in committing residential burglaries or other such serious matters, and who go to prison and then come out and continue in their attacks upon a community, should be out of that community to save that community from further assaults. So the reforms that we've seen, I think, again, well-intended. What was promised with them is that the monies that would be saved by them would provide housing, would provide services, would provide jobs, would provide insurances, that the community would have these individuals supervised so that they were successfully reintegrated. And I think that, much like the mental health system, which said 50 years ago that we're going to shut down our mental health institutions, with the promise to the community that we'll have successful programs in the community to care for people experiencing mental illness. That was never delivered. That we have a similar situation here today. Prison population today in California has been reduced from 170,000 to under 100,000 individuals. And yet I see, and our men and women are seeing in the streets, individuals that are coming out of prison with no housing. They're coming out of prison with no services. And they're coming out of prison and returning back to the only thing that they know, which is criminal enterprising and going back to their ways in which got them in prison to begin with. And whether that's their fault, society's fault, or whoever's fault it is. For me as an Angelino, as a chief, my concern is how do we get them services, but also the system must recognize those individuals who have a continued propensity for violence, a continued propensity for preying upon others, and hold them out of the community as a means of protecting the community and a means of ensuring those that would engage in this type of conduct, that there are consequences as a deterrent. It's not just a punishment situation. It's a matter of setting a stage that provides these individuals as examples so others recognize if they go down that path that they lose their freedom. And that deterrent value is something that some would say in our communities is absent at this moment. Now, whether that's in fairness to the criminal justice reform, whether that's a consequence of all that or any aspect of criminal justice reform, or it's another attribute of a COVID pandemic and all of the crisis and uncertainty that we've seen in the last 18 to 20 months, sociologists will figure this out and argue about this, I'm sure, for decades to come. But as a chief of police for Los Angeles, what I do believe is that collectively, rather than arguing with one another, we've got to collectively look at this problem of repeat violators and repeat offenders and find a way to rehabilitate them safely, effectively, but also protect the public from them. That's what would be my comment on criminal justice reform and the role of the district attorney. He and I agree that violent offenders have no place in our communities, and to that he's lent deputy district attorneys and DA investigators to help us in 3 of our 21 areas to focus on violent offenders who are using guns in their violence. And I look forward to him supporting also enhancements for the use of guns in crimes, whether it be a robbery or other serious offenses, because I believe those enhancements are there to deter others from using guns when they're involved in those type of violent acts. And I think it's appropriate, if we wish to see robbery suspects and others to stop carrying guns, is that there's a consequence for carrying that gun.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief, for your time. Any final thoughts?
Nope. I appreciate all of you. Take care.
And thank you, Chief. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you for the next one. Thank you.